I noticed that we're 3 minutes behind schedule. The dean would not like this. Good morning. My name is Michael DeMello. I'm class of 81, sorry. Boy, I just got 10 years there, huh? How about that? I wish. In one fell swoop, right? Oh, thank you. Thank you. I work on it. I was honored to be asked to introduce this session entitled The Convergence of Media and Technology in a Multi-Local World. I asked to introduce this. I find the theme very interesting and challenging. And one of the reasons is my experience at Columbia. Columbia has meant a great deal to me, both professionally and personally. I wouldn't have been able to achieve what I did in my career in both banking and in private equity without my Columbia Business School and my Columbia undergraduate degrees. I'm now delighted to introduce to you Jonathan Nee, with whom I had the pleasure of having dinner last night. Michael T. Fries, Professor of Professional Practice of Media and Technology and Co-Director of the Media and Technology Program. He will be moderating this session. Professor Nee teaches a number of courses, including media mergers and acquisitions and strategic management of media. He also serves as a senior advisor at Evercore and Trilantic Capital Partners, and previously held senior positions at Morgan Stanley's Media Group and in the Communications, Media, and Entertainment Group at Goldman Sachs. Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, okay. His writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the Atlantic. You can read more about him in the event program that was distributed as you walked in today. And now I'll turn over the floor to Professor Nee. Thank you very much.
And amongst other things, he was the author of The Extraordinary Wine last night, so we owe him an incredible debt of gratitude. So I guess I'm going to start the program by introducing you to the magic of the media and entertainment world as we've transformed this panel into a fireside chat. So some of you may have noticed that on the original program, this was going to be a panel, and unfortunately, two of our guests, Michael Fries and Véronique Morali, at the last minute had to be elsewhere. But the good news is that I am the Michael Fries professor, so kind of Michael Fries is here in spirit, and en étant à Paris, alors Véronique Morali est partout. So they are here in spirit, but in the flesh, we have Bob Backish, who is the CEO of Viacom, at a moment in the media industry's history and Viacom's history that makes the fact that we have him for the full hour, just one-on-one with all of us, an extraordinary gift to all of us. Bob has been at Viacom for 21 years, and he has done pretty much every job at Viacom, except I've never seen you working in the cafeteria. But other than that, there's still time, right? It's a tough business. Anything is possible. So we are very lucky to have him here because he is incredibly well positioned to answer my questions and your questions. So start thinking about your questions because it's going to move swiftly from our fireside chat to your fireside chat. So welcome. Thank you for doing this. I guess what I'd like to start with is the environment we're in, which is one of incredible and apparently accelerating change. And from a management perspective, part of the challenge of that for a global media business is that the nature of that accelerating change is different in different markets. It accelerates differently. It looks different, whether it's regulation, whether it's local tastes. So talk for a little bit about how you optimize the opportunity when you're in that kind of environment, both as you think about it on a market-by-market basis, and when focusing on a market-by-market basis is the right answer, as well as a global basis, because obviously if there's no scale, why bother being global?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be here with all of you in Paris. I always love being in Paris. And I've been CEO of Viacom for a little less than 2 years, but for the preceding decade, I ran our international networks business, which means I ran all the businesses outside the U.S., excluding the Paramount studio. So this notion of global is something that I spent a lot of time thinking about and, in fact, living. And if we rewind the tape to 2007, which is when I took over what was then called MTV Networks International, over time became called Viacom International Media Networks, which it still is today. You know, in '07, that was a business that actually wasn't really growing and was unprofitable. And I quickly came to call it a Confederation of Independent Nations. And it certainly had a focus on being local, but in many respects, local had become a cancer to the business. And so on set a journey to create a multinational media company out of it. And this notion of what we came to call, I didn't invent the language, it was invented at an ad sales meeting for the executives, global, part local. And so the answer to the question really is, you need to have an overall view, an overall plan. Part of the reason I got the CEO job, I actually think a big part of the reason is when I met the new board, they asked all the board members, all the divisions to come in and present as a primer. This is back in 2016. And we were the only group that came in not only with a primer of where we were, a little on where we had come from, but most important, where we were going. We call that Vision 2020. So as you think of a global enterprise, and really kind of any enterprise, you have to have a plan. But then when you get to the realities of dealing with the world, you quickly realize you have to customize that plan and the associated execution to the local level, because as Jonathan said, you have differences in regulation, you have differences in culture, you have differences in competition, you might have high GDP growth, you might have low GDP growth, you might have a distribution environment that is heavy free-to-air, in the case of media, or very high penetration pay, and all this stuff matters. And I also believe, by the way, that from a cultural standpoint, that yes, we are a U.S. media company, you know, we're listed in the New York Stock Exchange, et cetera, headquartered in New York, but we have real local footprints all around the world. Unlike most media companies, we don't just have sales forces outside the U.S., we have operating assets, including right here in France, where we operate a range of local French networks. But we're really guests in countries, you know, and so we do have to conform to culture. So the short answer is you have to have an overall plan, and then you have to the degree you think it makes sense, and you have to make some judgment, you have to customize at the local level, all while looking to preserve the benefits of scale where you can. Certainly, the further you get from the screen, the more you want to be kind of globe spanning with respect to, you know, for example, we have shared service centers on the financial side in Budapest and Hungary, which serve all of Europe. We do that because it's a very well educated geography, a lot of multinationals there, and so good labor force, and relative to, say, doing something here in Paris, significantly cheaper. But that's it. It's a balance.
So everybody is focused more or less on over-the-top and Netflix for the obvious reasons. AT&T, having closed the Time Warner deal, has recently announced, I think, a date for the launch of its Netflix competitor. Obviously, Disney first buying BAMTech to provide the infrastructure to actually do it, which Time Warner learned the hard way is something that you actually need before you announce you're going to provide an OTT product, and then bought Fox to have the content to do it, so they won't be far behind. You are probably you could probably be characterized as the last remaining independent media conglomerate with the studio. As you think about longer term being a global player, how essential do you think it will be to have your own proprietary OTT platform, or how sustainable is it to use the fact that it sounds like there's going to be multiple competing OTT platforms that you can get to bid against each other for your stuff?
Yeah, look, that question is kind of all the rage, and as you point out, the most recent development in that regard was AT&T's announcement this week that their D2C product will launch presumably in the U.S. Towards the end of 2019. I think it's probably worth stepping back a little bit from the specific of the question, although we'll go to the specific question and the specific answer, just to give it some context. Because what's really going on here is we're moving from a world, and again, to the first question, the specific at a country level will vary, but the trend line, so you may be at a different specific place, but the general notion is the same. We're moving from a world where everyone got access to kind of the same product, and when I say everyone, it might be 85% of the people in the US, it might be 50% of the people in France, et cetera, but generally there was very consistent availability of product, to a world where that is fragmenting. And it tends to be fragmenting by price points. And the reason that's happening is consumers have more choice than ever. So if we use a US example, that world used to be big basic, you know, call it $80 a month. Now, actually, your bill is higher because other things are attached to it. Today, you know, we have activity at a $40 price point. Actually, that's more like $45 now as price creeps up. Something that I said would happen 2 years ago because the current economics at that $40 price point are unsustainable if you care about making money, and we could debate maybe there's some people that don't care about making money because they have other businesses wrapped around it. And then you have lower end price points. You got some stuff going on in the high teens, and of course you have the Netflixes of the world at like $12, and then you also have free, also known as AVOD, ad-supported video on demand. So that's the big context, and OTT is part of that because over the top allows companies and therefore consumers to have access to different kind of bundles. And it's probably worth noting that at all those different price points, we're increasingly seeing that even the product within those price points isn't consistent. So this notion of exclusivity, you know, and again, this is a bit of a deviation from the past where it was more about ubiquity. Now you're getting more into exclusivity where people are either making or buying specific products for specific platforms that are operating at specific price points. So that's the big picture that's going on. We're going from a sort of a bit of a homogeneous world to a much more fragmented world. I think, by the way, in that journey, and we're probably still in the early innings of that journey. Nobody really knows where penetration in these tiers will level out, et cetera. But it still certainly has a ways to go. By example of that, the majority of the world is still at the highest price point in any particular market. But obviously the trend lines on things like what we call UEs, you know, the universe at different price points are showing the lower ends of the price points growing and the higher end of the price points declining. Again, as a macro statement, it varies by country. So in the context, so that's the kind of big setup. And again, the sort of PR and in some respects deal-making activity is all about companies vertically integrating and pursuing, and again, this is a generalization, but pursuing the creation of Netflix-like products because they see that, well, they see the valuation of the company, which continues to be extraordinary by most financial metrics. And they also see the fact that they have created a truly global network. Now, that product within that global network has a lot of local, and one of the things they're doing today is more and more local programming, which has some economic challenges But nonetheless, people see that and say, okay, that's the future, therefore that's where we must go. And you see, as an example of that, the Fox-Disney transaction, you see AT&T Time Warner transaction, and then a lot of other activity about people getting in the OTT space in a more organic way. When we look at that, I look at sort of call it the Netflix space, saying it's very capital intensive. Again, you can just look at whether what they're spending organically, $12 billion on content, rough plus or minus. The Disney transaction, what they paid for Fox, which, by the way, when the dust really settles on that, which will include the divestiture of the regional sports networks in the United States, for some range of, call it, 20 plus billion dollars, that transaction will get even more expensive because those will clearly trade at a lower multiple than the multiple they paid for all of Fox. So it's very expensive game. It also looks, if you draw any kind of trend line, like it'll be crowded. And so from a Viacom perspective, we look at that and say, that's not really the game we want to go play. On some levels, we don't have the balance sheet to do it anyway. But on more practical level, we think there's actually great opportunity in this world through a different path. And that path is informed by the fact that sitting here today, more content is consumed than video content is consumed than at any point in time in history. The trend line of that continues to go up. The opportunity to see that continue is definitely there as the mobile infrastructure really migrates. I mean, 3G is actually sufficient, but certainly when you get to 4 and 5, there's no question that you have even better appliances for video consumption. And you have inherent consumer demand. People like to be entertained. We used to say, our product could only be used on the living room couch. Then it got to be in the kids' room, second TV set. Now it's really anywhere. So there's huge and growing demand at the consumer level. At the, call it, platform level, there's more and more entrants. I found it somewhat amusing at the beginning of this week that it was rumored in the US that Costco was going to develop an over-the-top product. What subsequently came out, which makes much more sense, is what they seem to be doing more is they want to offer OTT products to some of the high ends of their club members. So that would be essentially licensing or in some form subsidizing. That makes much more sense than them starting it from scratch themselves. We could get into why if we want to, but just take that as a given for a moment. So you see all this activity, and as all this activity is happening, you also see vertical integration happening. So, the Fox Disney essentially being taken off the market as a supplier as they vertically integrate and drive presumably one or more D2C services. The Warner Brothers, Time Warner Company, which includes the Warner Brothers Studio and the Turner Networks, probably on some trend line of vertical integration, particularly building off of this announcement earlier in the week. So let's assume Warner product is less and less available. I don't know exactly what Comcast, NBCU is going to do, but they clearly could go down that path. And at the same time, you have Viacom, which is at the core a content company. Sumner Redstone's famous words, content is king, which back from the 80s. And we're truly a global company in that we create content all around the world. So as there's more and more demand and less availability from historically trusted high-quality suppliers, we think that's a great opportunity. As an example of that, our Paramount, and for those of you that don't know Viacom, we have a set of businesses in what's known as the TV business, or historically known as the TV business, which is around networks and original content, brands like Nickelodeon and Comedy Central and MTV and the like. And then we also have one of the iconic Hollywood 100 plus, actually about 107-year-old film studios in Paramount Pictures. So in Paramount, some years ago when we used to be, our company and CBS were one company, the companies were split. This is in the kind of 05, 06 timeframe. And at the time, Paramount was in the film and television business, But the television production business and associated library went with the CBS company because CBS had a US broadcast network. And we could get into a debate of whether that was a smart idea, a dumb idea, et cetera. It doesn't matter for this purpose because it happened. And so you had Paramount only making film product. And in recent history, certainly in the 14, 15, 16, quite unsuccessfully. That's a whole other story. But a couple years ago, for practical reasons and because we saw demand, Paramount got back in the television production business. And in this year, which we just closed in 2018, it did just short of $400 million of business in that category, up from 0 4 years ago. And it not only did that, but it made hits. Some of the hits you might be familiar with. It's 13 Reasons Why, which we made for Netflix, The Alienist, which we made for the Turner Networks, and more recently, Jack Ryan, which we've made for Amazon. That business had, we call it 9 series on air or online for customers, including internal customers. In 18, it'll have 16 on air or online in 19, and it'll do about $600 million of business. So very rapid growth. And it's really been driven by this phenomenon. As we get our international assets, we own the #1 broadcaster in Argentina called Telefe, which has its own kind of mini Paramount lot and produces about 3,000 episodes of content a year just outside of Buenos Aires. That's now making between 700 and 1,000 hours in 19, it depends on pickups, for kind of a Latin orbit, US Hispanic, Latin America, and people buying novellas all around the world. You add that in and what we're doing with our domestic brands, that'll be $1 billion business in a couple years. And the fundamental reason it's that is all this demand. And for us, we see that as a very compelling opportunity. We also see some over-the-top product more in the niche. We have a preschool product called Noggin. Second version of that will come out right after the holidays. We're working on a third version. I think the third version is more interesting. But it really is. It is a tremendous opportunity for a truly global content company. And you don't have to play it all the same way.
So as a recovering investment banker, that was a disturbingly coherent description of the strategic imperatives, because as a recovering investment banker, we thrive by people doing incoherent things. And the first 10 years of this century was mostly focused on companies separating. So Time Warner spun off their cable business because they realized it actually made no particular sense. The same thing happened at Cablevision, spinning off its content business. And then with Comcast buying NBCU, that was the beginning of going back. And indeed, that is how bankers are able to send their children
Good for fees,
to private school. They come together, they go apart, they come together. But this is actually a moment of extraordinary joy for bankers, because just the overall quantum of deals, which I think at the end of the day is probably most associated with fear and desperation. Bankers feed off of fear. But it's not, it's an odd mixture of vertical, horizontal, international, conglomerate. When you look, it sounds like you're a bit skeptical of the vertical phenomenon, but when you look at the overall spectrum of deal activity that's happening, what piece of it do you say, well, that actually is interesting and might make sense for us?
Sure. So let's start with a little story. Back in 1997, when I just joined Viacom, I joined at the corporate level, running planning, development, and technology, so that included strategy and M&A. And at the time, we owned a company called Simon & Schuster. And at the time, Simon & Schuster was a full-line publisher, both in the consumer, the professional, and the educational business. And at the time, we were thinking about what do we do with this asset? How do we create value? And the thesis we came up with was taking the educational piece and moving it in a technology-fueled direction and creating a new age education company. Maybe we did that with a tech partner, who knows? A bunch of bankers came in because we were trying to figure out if we did it as a venture, what would it be worth? And so they started showing us comps of educational publishing companies. And pretty quickly we said, well, wait a second, are you saying Simon Schuster is worth X? And the X had a billions attached to it. And they said, well, actually your company's better than these companies, should be worth more. And we pretty quickly decided, because the company Viacom at the time was highly levered, something else we inherited in 16, but that's a different story. We said, wait a second, if we can sell the company for this much money and not have any execution risk, that's a better play for us at that point in time, because candidly, we're more about the entertainment business than the education business, and there are no synergies that we can figure out that are material between entertainment and education. So we divested it, we sold to Pearson, we sold at a very nice multiple, we were very happy, life was good. And then about 6 months later, one of our competitors ran a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal that said, X, uniting education and entertainment. And I looked at the ad, and I said, there is absolutely no basis to do this. They don't know what they're doing. There are no synergies involved. Something that, at least in that space, I continue to believe today, and I think it's fair to say that their
I don't know
adventure...
how, we're in France. How can you make fun of Mr. Messier? That ad was taken out by one of the few French media moguls for the brief period of time that he was a media mogul for after he bought Vivendi Universal, I believe, yeah?
I'm not going to comment on whose ad it was.
Okay, sorry.
I'm going to stick with the basis of the point, which is there are no synergies in that combination. So, this notion of vertical integration, which, as you point, companies get taken apart, companies get put together, it's kind of a cyclical thing, is not a new phenomenon, although there are rare examples. I never say never. There are some productive examples, I'm sure, but it is very rare that there are actual or synergies. And even if you look at Comcast today, where Comcast bought NBC Universal, and I remember when that happened, it was, I don't know, a decade ago, roughly. At the time it happened, we in the industry thought, well, that won't go well, clash of culture, et cetera. But to their credit, that has gone very well. And in fact, NBC Universal is a more successful company today than it was when it was owned by the prior owners. But I would assert to you that that has nothing to do with vertical integration. That has to do with better management. And so I think you got to really look at it and say, what are you trying to do? Now, when we at Viacom look at this, we have a pretty levered company circa the end of 16. We were called investment grade, and we had an investment grade rating, but we didn't have investment grade metrics, and we had a glide path to get there by actually September of this year that just passed, and we were supposed to be at investment grade metrics by that time, or we would be downgraded by S&P. Now, I'm happy to say that in August, S&P reaffirmed our investment grade credit rating, and that was on the back of paying down $2 billion in debt. We'll pay another $1 billion in debt by the end of this calendar year, improvement in operating metrics, et cetera. But if you had asked me in January of 2018, would that happen, I would say no. I was pretty sure we were going to get downgraded, but thanks to hard work and all that, that didn't happen. So I say all this to have you understand, we've been constrained in our ability to use our balance sheet to pursue M&A, and we haven't gone after any quote-unquote scale transactions. Instead, what we've been doing is looking for ways to use transactions to accelerate our strategy. So these tend to be much smaller deals that have very specific purpose, and we've done 3 of them in the last 12 months. We acquired first a branded content company called Husei. For those of you that are less familiar with the space, branded content is kind of an integrated piece of content with advertising messaging in it. Husei does that mostly in the digital native space, so making stuff and publishing it on third-party social platforms like YouTube, et cetera. And generating revenues and cutting through for advertisers. So we acquired that and bolted it on to our company as a kind of a lower-end ad solution that we didn't have. But that, when complemented with our kind of pipeline into the largest agencies and advertisers in the world, has already proved quite successful. We then followed that up buying a company called VidCon, which runs the largest annual gathering of social influencers in the world in Anaheim, California. Think of them as YouTube stars. And so we now own that company, and it provides not only a business, because doing that's a business, but it also provides a platform for relationships with this type of talent. And we do use that type of talent both for our traditional product and for our digital native product. So we thought that was a good idea. And now we're in, just like in the case of Husei, we sort of partnered it with our existing sales force to give them product depth and different selling capability. In the case of VidCon, what we're doing is we're globalizing it. So we'll have VidCon's event is in Anaheim, California in the summer. We just had one in Australia, and we're going to have one in London in 2019. So again, accelerating this strategy of building stronger relationships in that space and also an events business. And then the third one we just acquired was a company called Awesomeness. Now, Awesomeness is interesting in that prior to acquiring the company, we hired the creator of the company, Brian Robbins, to run a label for Paramount. Part of our strategy, we probably should have started there so you know big picture what we're trying to accomplish, but part of Viacom's strategy is to leverage the combined company a lot more, so actually get some scale through assets we already own, and part of that is using our brands from our network space in the film business. So think films under the BET brand or Nickelodeon brand, et cetera. The first of those, by the way, will come out in 2 weeks. It's a BET film by Tyler Perry, who's probably the most prolific African-American producer, starring Tiffany Haddish, who's one of the hottest stars, not just African-American stars, but stars just full stop, called Nobody's Fool. Anyway, we hired Brian to lead that because he had a unique combination of historical expertise. So he was in-house, and then when we created another division to more aggressively go after the digital native space, Viacom Digital Studios, we hired another Awesomeness exec, the number 2 exec, Kelly Day, to run that. So we had 2 people who really knew the company in-house, and Awesomeness had gone from an independent company to a 3-way joint venture whose owners were Comcast, NBCU, Hearst, and Verizon. 3 people that couldn't figure out what they wanted to do, and so became a non-core asset, and we swooped in and bought it for 5 cents on the dollar relative to the last round when 2 of the partners had bought in. So it was a great financial transaction, but it was, again, an example of an accelerant because people look at that and say, oh yeah, that's a website company. And they're not exactly right. What it really is a content company. And it makes long-form content, both film length and episodic television length, target at a young female demographic, so think teen girls, and does it at very attractive price points, think $500,000 an episode for scripted, which is a very low price point. And so that's part of our broadening. You know, I talked about the incredible demand for content. This company makes content for Netflix, makes content for Hulu, and for others, and we think fits very nicely in. So that's what we've been doing, and in every case, it is, in the case of Husei, it has accelerated what we call our advanced marketing solutions, our next generation advertising strategy. In the case of VidCon, it has accelerated both our event strategy, because there's a lot of time spent in experiential, and our digital native strategy with respect to talent relations. And in the case of Awesomeness, it has accelerated our content strategy as we ramp and create more and more. And we did all 3 for well south of $100 million.
Well, that highlights why every banker you see has a huge smile on their face in the current environment. So you bought Awesomeness for 5 cents on the buck. They do long-form content. They also do some short-form video content. Yeah. Most everybody, including Google, who has tried to make investments in short-form content, has been lucky to get 5 cents on the dollar once they did it. And yet, at the same time, Jeffrey Katzenberg is able to raise at $1 billion valuation and take money from all kinds of otherwise apparently successful and intelligent people from a standing start in the face of all of this evidence that it will end badly, a brand new company, I think actually called New TV.
You are correct.
To create from a standing start short form content, and it's Jeffrey Katzenberg and Meg Whitman and a bunch of other more or less famous people, but no actual underlying assets, but $1 billion of valuation. What do you?
No, cash. They got the money.
Of cash money, cash money. So I guess it must be post money more than $1 billion. What do you make of that?
Well, look, Jeffrey has a very compelling idea, and he has a very strong track record. His idea is that there's an opportunity fueled by mobile consumption, and again, a thesis that that's only going to continue to grow as devices and networks get higher and higher capabilities. His thesis, and it's based on research that he's done, is that there's an opportunity to create high-quality content in the roughly 6-minute duration space. And the research goes to average length of tune in places, et cetera. And so he believes that there's an opportunity to create a company, now called New TV, to essentially create a new entertainment format, the 6-minute high-quality video format, and create an SVOD, subscription video on demand, service around that. And he actually originally started out looking to raise $2 billion and fell back to $1 billion, which makes it probably, if not the, certainly one of the best capitalized startups of all time. Look, he originally was going to get all the money from just the media and entertainment industry. We are, as an industry, own some equity in it, but the bulk of the money didn't come from us, came from more, dare I say, traditional financial sources, investors. Look, I think it's a very interesting thesis. For the record, we are a small minority, a very small minority owner at Viacom. And Jeffrey's not a guy you would bet against, having seen him and known him for some years. So I think it's interesting. I think it's great for a company like Viacom because assuming he is successful at creating a 6-minute format, whether it's Paramount or it's MTV or it's Telefe, our Latin American business, which operates under Viacom International Studios, will be supplying it. And in fact, we're already working in that direction. As to whether it'll be successful or not, we'll see. But it is certainly a grand vision, a motivated and successful guy, and tremendous financial resources to go after it. Although, from what I understand, one of his challenges is if you're joining as an employee now and you're getting equity comp, you're joining at $1 billion valuation, which has proved to be somewhat of a challenge perhaps they didn't expect. But nonetheless, audacious plan, and we wish him great success.
All right, I have one more question, then all of you start thinking about your questions. Bruce Greenwald, who is speaking as well, and I wrote a book called Curse of the Mogul, as you may recall, and one of the main complaints that we had, just sort of looking at the data of media companies over time, is the disdain for efficient operations in favor of grand strategic thinking. And to be fair, part of that disdain, I think, is driven by what is now viewed as a truism from William Golding's book, that in entertainment, nobody knows anything. And if nobody knows anything,
that's a truism.
you might as well just focus on strategy, since trying to focus on the actual nuts and bolts of operations is kind of a waste of time. That said, you've gotten a huge amount of credit in a relatively short period of time from turning around Paramount, which was a basket case and has had a series of successful films. And you described what you've done with the television business, which basically went from 0 to 100 in a very short period of time. When people hear the word efficiency, you immediately go back to widgets and how many widgets you can get out of a machine in a certain amount of time. Does it even make sense to talk about efficiency in the context of creative businesses? How do you think about it? did you just get lucky, or did you do something in particular to turn around the entertainment portions of those businesses?
Well, there's a lot packed in there. So I do believe that I have been fortunate in my life, so I won't say we had no luck involved. But look, my playbook is management team plus strategy plus execution. And so if you look at Paramount circa the end of 16, the studio had just come off a financial year where it lost $500 million on an operating level and consumed $1.2 billion in cash, which is a pretty good trick when you have a library that throws off $300+ million to the positive. You do the math. And you know, and I had never been responsible for a Hollywood studio, major studio, but it was pretty apparent to me that something was broken. And so we you know, kind of thought about it, developed a new strategy which fit in the context of our Viacom strategy overall, and went shopping for new management. Because at the end of the day, people are responsible for running businesses, and if a business isn't running well, one of the levers you got to pull is management. So put a new strategy in place, hired new management, in this case in the form of Jim Giannopoulos, who had a successful run at Fox. And after screening a lot of people and meeting less people, far less people, but spending time with people, emerged as my clear #1 choice. And then under Jim's leadership, rebuilt the management team there. And now Jim joined as an employee in, I don't know, like April, I think, of 17. So he's been there, called a year, a little less than a year and a half. We now have had basically 3 successive wins. The first one was a film called Quiet Place, which is this low-budget John Krasinski thriller, but really, they thought it was a horror film, but it was really a family film. If any of you have seen it, you know what I mean. And if you haven't seen it, I'd really encourage you to, because it's a really compelling film. Made that film for about $17 million. Obviously, had to market it, so we invested far more in it. And produced a very, very nice return. That was followed up by a small film called Book Club, which actually Jim bought because we didn't have any films to release in a particular window. That film was intended to skew older female. Its cast is older, et cetera. It's a great film, turned out to do very well for us. And then it's kind of interesting that we're sitting here in Paris. We then had the 6th installment of Mission Impossible, starring Tom Cruise, and people were somewhat skeptical, how great a film is it going to be, although the other studios stayed away from us on opening weekend, as they were right to do, which went on to become not only a successful film, but the biggest of all the films, the Mission films to date, which doesn't usually happen for the 6th film. And that's true on a U.S. Domestic theatrical basis, on an opening weekend basis, and on a global basis. And the only one that you could say we had gravity pulling in our direction was global, because China is bigger today than it was for the 5th installment or the 4th installment. But opening weekend in U.S., you can't make that claim. It really is a great film. And now those films were, none of those, well, Mission wasn't greenlit, nor was Quiet Place greenlit by the current management team. Quiet Place was greenlit 3 weeks before Jim started. But they managed the production, and they were the guys who marketed it. Among other things, he brought in a new head of marketing who made it break out from what could have been a niche film into a mass market film. And the same thing with Mission. They kept it on budget, something that Paramount hadn't been good at in the last number of years. Got the film down to a more reasonable length, something also Paramount hadn't been good at. It still was too long, but and marketed it very effectively. So there's a case where through management and a differentiated strategy, and the strategy is really going to start coming online in 3 weeks, when on November 2nd, I think that's about 3 weeks, maybe a little bit more, when the first of our branded films come out under the BET label. So I would say that's an example of execution, certainly not M&A. Now your point on efficiency is an interesting one. I do believe there's a real role for efficiency. It won't cure all ills for sure, and you can screw things up by cutting money, so you have to be careful where you cut money. But there's no question that operating not only well but efficiently is something you should do in the media business. And that goes to, we embarked on a cost transformation in our domestic business towards the beginning of this fiscal year. In that, we dropped about 100 million, a little more than 100 million the bottom line this year, and we'll drop over 300 million as we kind of move forward. And that's just doing things like sourcing in a much more structured and, dare I say, efficient way. It's things like opening shared service centers, like I mentioned on the financial side in Budapest, where you move transactional work, at least initially transactional work, to lower cost locations and benefit from factor costs, as well as looking at organization and finding ways you could operate in a leaner, more nimble way, which, by the way, can pay effectiveness dividends in addition to efficiency dividends, something we've also seen. So it's certainly not a one-dimensional playbook, and I wouldn't bet the ranch on just efficiencies, but I would think it's irresponsible not to look for ways you could operate more efficiently, particularly in a business that's not growing 20% a year. Now, if your business is growing 20% a year, I would argue don't worry about that, right? It's more important to have more people running in parallel and grabbing for market growth. And certainly our media networks business had been doing that if you go back to kind of the 90s, et cetera. But at some point as a business matures, it becomes more important to operate efficiently. And that's certainly a part of our playbook, will continue to be part of our playbook.
Great. Why don't we, sir, why don't you wait for a mic? I'm sorry.
I think he's got.
All right, you'll be second. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much.
Follow the mic.
I have two questions. One is...
But we're only going to take one, so you'll have to do that.
One now. Did the Murdochs get out at the top? And what do you think of the next strategy? I mean, are they now ahead of the curve, of the curves we spoke about, you spoke about earlier?
Well, anyone that thinks they can call the top shouldn't be running a media company, should probably be strictly in the investment business. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask if he got out at the top. Obviously, I think everyone, certainly in the media business, found it interesting that Rupert was a seller. He's not historically been that, as you well know. Now, arguably, he's not getting any younger either. But I think he saw an opportunity, and again, it's really more of a question to him than to me, but he got a very high multiple for that asset, and clearly was something he thought made sense to do. I think the Sky transaction is probably the more extreme version. For those of you that are less familiar with this, as part of Fox selling to Disney, it also put Sky, which is a European company, biggest presence in the UK, but also in Germany and Italy and now Spain, more on the distribution side. It basically put that in play because Fox had a significant minority stake, actually had tried to buy the whole thing some years ago and ran into problems with among other things, the British government. But that was an asset that also people thought would never be available for sale. And if you look at the multiple Comcast just paid for that, it's pretty extraordinary. So on a sort of multiple continuum basis, he clearly did a nice deal. The deal actually hasn't closed yet on the Disney side. But I don't know what else was going through his head, but I think that was pretty impressive in terms of value recognition for those assets.
Talking about the convergence of media, how much is the connected car and autonomous vehicles affecting your future plans?
Well, this goes to what we were talking about in the beginning, which is we are in a world, which I think this trend line will continue, and something like a connected car is part of why it will continue, where demand for content will continue to go up. I mean, think of being living room. Now, all of a sudden, instead of you driving your car, you're going to be driven, essentially, and why wouldn't you want to get entertained along the way? So I think it's a very good assumption to operate that that'll be another opportunity. Now, will it be delivered by an existing distribution player? Does Sirius XM, as an example, who's in the satellite radio business, and a big part of their business is based on people getting new cars that have Sirius radios built in and them benefiting from that? Do they transition, and it's run by a guy named Mel Karmazin, who actually used to be involved with Viacom. Do they go from audio to video? Maybe. And I'm not saying anything because that's no insider view of Sirius, I'm just speculating. Or does some other type of entrant go and do that? Or does Uber try to do that as part of their app? Who the hell knows? But that will happen for sure. And it goes back to really why I believe Viacom is in such a great place. Because go to the Fox-Disney transaction or the Warner transaction. Both of those are the best things that could possibly have happened to Viacom. People go, what? How do you think that? You know, aren't you worried? No. They highlight the value of the assets we own, in this case, certainly of a Hollywood studio. And in fact, the supply of those has diminished by 2, and we own one of them. So that's a great event in terms of focusing on the value of the assets we own. And secondarily, something that we're still not really beginning even to get credit for in terms of our equity. And secondarily, they are part of this continuum that's driving more and more demand for compelling content. And, you know, we are, I'd say, one of the few companies that not only produce content across formats, theatrical length, episodic television length, short form length, but also do it on a global basis and have a track record of producing hits, including in 2018. So I think that's a great thing, and I think the connected car, which who knows, you know, when it's going to be. I was at CES not last year, the year before, and saw the Mercedes one. It looked pretty cool. But it will definitely continue to create demand for high quality content. And it'll probably do that in a way where you're able to, your ability to produce in different lengths at different price points is important. And that's, again, why I love the fact that we bought Awesomeness. I love that we produce content in Buenos Aires. I mean, one of the unfortunate things about being in Argentina lately has been the destruction of the Argentinian peso. But before that happened, doing something in Argentina cost 30 cents on the dollar versus doing it in the US, or certainly doing it in New York. It now costs 15. So it's an extraordinary opportunity, and our Telefe unit produced 4 shows this year that had over a 45 share on television, which is a staggering high, in this case, number. So, you know, at the core, we are producing not only content, but hit content across formats. We talked about the film example also, and all around the world. And as connected cars come online, I think that'll be additive, and it certainly fits within the context of our strategy.
Okay, last 2 here and here, so go ahead.
One back here.
We'll make it 3.
We also got to get some women here. You're going all guys. What's up with that?
All right. So neither of you are
Sorry,
women.
I know you're a guy.
I've been man-shamed.
I know, I see a woman back here.
Why don't we go to a woman next, and then we'll do 2 more. Go. What can you just pass back, and I promise we'll get you, and then we'll get Leon.
Come on, we got to have fun with this, right?
Sorry.
Bob, I was wondering if you could share a bit more as part of Viacom's transformation, how you're approaching data and analytics and building that capability into your organization, especially as you're competing against the Netflixes of the world.
Sure. So I think at a high level, it fits into 2 areas. It fits into internally making better decisions and in terms of externally evolving our product line. An example of the latter that I mentioned briefly is, you know, we have a multi-billion-dollar advertising business where we essentially attach messaging to our media assets to benefit our clients in various shapes and forms. In the last couple years, we have looked to evolve that business to benefit from increased targeting, essentially, and use that to drive price and yield. That operates under a banner we call Advanced Marketing Solutions. And again, there are various shapes and forms of it, but in the last 2 years, as we have engaged in a different way, for example, with our distribution community, folks like Comcast and Charter and the like, part of our strategy there has been to broaden the conversation and not just license them a set of linear feeds and on-demand product, but also provide other areas where we can both benefit and therefore become a more important supplier to them in this changing world. And so part of that's advanced marketing solutions, and specifically, we now can insert dynamically into over 90% of VOD homes in the US, which means I can deliver an ad to your set-top that's different than the gentleman next to you. We do that through essentially access to the plant, but we also do that by buying some data from the distributor, which allows for that targeting. So that's an example, and we can also do that increasingly in what we call the national feed, whereas we can dynamically insert into some of that inventory. That'll be a journey over time as more distributors come out and we extend into the clock. But that's an example of data really being fused to an existing business so that we evolve it and ultimately ensure that we are competitive with the FANG guys and in fact have all the benefits of our environment, which tends to be more secure, not suffer from adjacencies, but also benefit from targeting and other attributes associated with data-driven advertising. So that's a kind of product example. And by the way, we'll do well, I say we will, now that fiscal year has closed. So we did just short of $300 million of advanced marketing solutions business. And that business is on a very healthy growth trajectory. So it's important not only with respect to the evolution of our product line and serving the needs of our clients, but also in the context of returning our ad business to growth, particularly in the US. The international, like everything varies by country. But and then internally,
I'm going to get in trouble because so we're going to go to the next one. We go to Leon, and
that was
then
a
we'll
nice
do
way
these
of
two.
saying I'm long-winded. Thank you.
No, it's
I'm just curious for your perspective. They originally broke up Viacom into two companies, CBS and Viacom.
Yes.
I think the motivation by Sumner at that time was to focus or create visibility for the high growth of Viacom. Now, and it turns out that CBS was the winner and Viacom didn't know that well. Now the family wants to put the two of them back together again. So what has changed in the industry, and what is the advantage to the shareholders of putting Viacom and CBS back together again? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is we continue to see significant opportunities in terms of organic execution. And actually, we're starting to get, and this goes to both the turnaround of our company, I gave the Paramount example, and also the evolution of our company. And so AMS fits into the evolution of it. And we're starting to get some credit on the street for that. So, and if you look at how 19 will track out, we'll continue to put points on the board. In fact, I believe we'll put points on the board as soon as our next earnings call, where we'll talk about what's going on, which will be mid-November. And that is our focus today. Now, in the context of putting companies together writ large, not vertical integration, but more horizontal integration, of which Viacom, CBS would be an example, and you could create other examples. There are material synergies associated with things like that. When we were looking at a potential deal with CBS some time ago, because there is no active process at the moment. And if there were to be, that would be more driven by our boards. But at the time, I was publicly quoted saying there was $1 billion of synergies there. And those were mostly on the cost side, vast majority on the cost side. There was some revenue built in. And look, $1 billion of earnings, not that easy to create. And so we thought there was some interesting opportunity there. And I think that goes back to Jonathan's point earlier of why there's a lot of interest in transactions in general. In places where growth is challenged, that can be a way to create earnings growth and evolve the positioning of a company. So I think that's mostly what that's about. And again, it's not our focus today. Our focus today continues to be on organic execution, but there continues to be speculation about that topic.
yes. What?
Broke up the two companies.
But he didn't decide to do that. But go ahead.
Good morning. You described the Netflix strategy, the $12 billion spend on content as capital intensive. So I'm curious, you think you'll get a return on that, especially in the context of the sprawl of OTT offerings happening? You have Disney, HBO, etc. So just, you seem to be thinking that maybe they're not going to get a return on that. So if you could just explain. Thanks.
Well, the short answer is we'll see. I think if you look at equity valuations, the street certainly thinks they're going to get a return on that. So if I'm them, I'm going to keep playing that direction until someone changes their mind. And, you know, who knows if that'll happen or not. But certainly, look, credit where credit is due. They have created a definitive global network. They were the first people to do it. They have triple-digit million subs. And they have, good degree of consumer appeal. And they're continuing to invest in that, and their valuation is supporting that. Now, clearly, other people have seen that, and they're either looking to defend traditional businesses. You know, I was in Europe in June, as an example, meeting with, not in France, but I was in France, but these particular meetings weren't in France, meeting with some of our traditional clients who also want to reinforce their position in sort of the video delivery ecosystem in their country and are looking for exclusive product. And that's triggered a strategy where we're putting together an unwired network of buyers all around the world and producing content for that network, because none of them, as they say to me in those meetings, have $12 billion to spend. But they believe they need exclusive content, and by buying just a country specific and us putting a slate of 10 or 12 together per year, it's a way to fit that. And so I think you will see competitive responses from traditional players. You'll see other people with a more frontal assault to develop a more equivalent product. And clearly, that's the narrative where Disney's going. That's the narrative of where AT&T is going, at least in the US. Disney arguably more global. And we'll see how that all shakes out.
Last question.
Okay, morning. Well, we've been talking about the convergence of media from a business point of view, obviously because we are sitting in a business conference. But I would like your honest answer. I would like to look at this topic in another way. Is the media converging into the politics of every nation? Is the media now trying to control the politics of every country? Because we see presidents complaining about it and prime ministers also. So is the media manipulating the politics of a nation?
Well, let me first start by saying that we're not in the news business at Viacom. We're in the entertainment business, so my comments will be strictly my own opinion and have nothing to do with our business. Other media companies have news businesses, as an example. So I'd say two things in response to your question. One is media businesses, at least a subset of the media businesses, revenue and therefore earnings and presumably valuations are based on their ability to get consumers to spend time with them. And so that is a guiding premise that we certainly use when we make decisions of what shows to greenlight or films to greenlight, et cetera. And, I think more broadly people make decisions. But the second thing I'd say, which is actually what I think is going on here, is it has nothing to do with traditional media per se. Sure, the news networks are playing into it, but that's not what's going on here. What's going on here, and I think it's troubling, is the impact on society of social media. Because social media theoretically gives everybody a voice, but practically speaking, only promotes extreme voices. So it's driving polarization, because only extreme points cut through the clutter, and then people subscribe to things that fit their interest versus the old days of getting a more balanced view from, say, a traditional news network. So at the core of what's going on here is the societal impact of social media. And my concern is the trend line says it's only going to continue to drive polarization and essentially destabilize. And I don't really know what you do about that. But that's much more about what's going on here than what CNN or Fox News or, pick your favorite or least favorite news brand is doing. At the core, it's being driven by social media.
So speaking of important societal trends, I believe that based on your performance today, there will be a huge trend of panels becoming fireside chats because of the quality of what you delivered us
here.
today. Thank you. Thanks, man.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.